Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our second of 3-session holiday series with BDSA, Eat, Drink, and Be Merry. First of all, surprise, Jessica Lucas is not the one who is presenting today, and I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Kelly Nielsen, and I am the Vice President of Insights and Analytics with BDSA, and I'm thrilled to be here today. Just as a little bit of my background, prior to joining BDSA, I spent the first 13 years of my career focusing on insights and innovation consulting, specifically for the alcohol beverage industry, and more recently, the past year or two, focusing on cannabis as well. So I am very excited that the first BDSA webinar that I get to give is focusing on insights into the US and Canada cannabis beverage market. I'm really thrilled to be here, and over the next hour or so, we have some really exciting content. Just to provide some perspective on how this is all going to work, the first half hour or so, we will be talking through some information on what's going on in the industry, start with an overall market landscape, and then dig into some great did you know about the cannabinoid beverage industry. And then the second half of this, we have a fabulous panel that will be joining me. We have Luke Anderson, co-founder of Cann, Jeremy Marshall, Brewmaster with Lagunitas and Hi-Fi, and also Lori Hatcher, who is head of marketing at Trust Beverages. So it is going to be a fabulous conversation, and I look forward to that. Before we jump into all of the nitty-gritty on beverages, I want to give a quick refresher on what BDSA does and who we are. And at the highest level, we are all things analytics, market research, and data covering the cannabinoid industry, the total market. And what that really means is that we're providing insights in order to help our clients make the best decisions possible in this constantly evolving, ever-changing space. And we do that through a couple of different ways. And throughout this presentation, you're going to see data points from a really wide range of different solutions that we offer, but to provide a little context on what those are. The first is retail sales tracking, and this is probably the thing that we are most known for, but this is really about understanding what is selling in the marketplace, when, at what price point. And what's really exciting here is that when it comes to resales tracking, sales tracking, we're able to get really granular at the product level. We cover today 8 states and 2 Canadian provinces, with more coming throughout the year and into the future, which we know is a very exciting time. A lot more states and provinces, or a lot more states are coming online, and so we're constantly going to be updating and pushing that forward. The second is consumer insights. This is all about understanding what consumer behaviors and attitudes are towards this particular industry. We're able to talk to folks that are currently using, folks that are acceptors to the industry, folks that aren't currently using or actually even reject the industry in order to understand what are those consumption patterns, purchasing habits, what could get folks to actually opt into this industry or purchase more. And what's really exciting about that is we even have an opportunity to provide a segmentation to folks. And so we actually have a total consumer segmentation of the marketplace that takes a look at consumers of cannabis and has identified 6 different profiles, for example, but really helping our clients understand how they can make better decisions based on what consumers think today, and what's really cool is this is something that we trend over time. So we're about to actually launch the wave 7 of this. So we'll have even more updated data in the next couple weeks. But this is something that we're able to track over time and understand how consumer perceptions are changing as the market evolves. And this is something that is available in the United States and Canada, and we can get granular here as well. And these 2 things, resale sales tracking, consumer insights, really are part of the base of foundation also for our market forecast. So this is really about understanding the total addressable market for the opportunity size for cannabis. And what's really great about this is it gives us the opportunity to see where we've been, because we have all of this great information, where we are today, and understanding what's selling, what are consumers thinking, in order for us to project what's going on into the future. So as we go through this, you will see some of our projections on our expectations for market forecasts. I'm getting as granular as looking at something like the edibles market, or in some cases, beverages specifically, to identify that future opportunity. And this is something that, based on the way that we're looking at it, we're taking into account regulatory formatting. We're taking into account legalization. We're taking into account both the adult use and medical, also illicit market in some cases. And so we're really able to get that full picture. And it's something that's available for both the US and Canada. Getting very granular at the state or province level, different categories, but we also can provide size of opportunity going out 5 years in up to 38 other countries. So I'm going to provide some of this context of how this information can be used today, but as always, if there's any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me or anyone else on your team. And so without further ado there, I want to start with a quick overall market update on what are we seeing when we take a look at the total cannabis industry, as well as digging in a little bit to edibles and beverages specifically. And I call out edibles, and as we're going through this, we will be peppered a little bit with edibles, a little bit with beverages, because in reality, beverages do fall into our total edibles category. And I think it's really important to talk about them a little bit together. And also, we'll be taking a look at both the United States and the Canadian market. And so for those of you that were with us a couple weeks ago when we talked about the EAT portion of our Eat, Drink, and Be Merry webinar here, you will have seen some of the information that's on the right-hand side of the screen. So what you're seeing here, or excuse me, the left-hand side. But what you're seeing here is our projection for the size of the total legal dispensary markets for the United States and Canada over the next 5 years. And so a couple weeks ago, we talked about how the total United States market, 2020, looking at about $16.2 or so billion in size when we take a look at the total adult use and medical market, but we expect it to be close to 35 billion by the year 2025, with medical market making up about 30% of that spending. But what I also want to call out as we're talking about the beverage space and the edible space today is what we're expecting from the Canadian market. And within the Canadian market, we're expecting the overall size of that industry to increase to about $6.1 billion by 2025. So substantial difference in size of industry there. However, when we take a look at what markets really matter, California as a market and then Canada, excuse me, really reflect that 1 and 2. That when you think about that size of Canada and what it could be, we expect the size of Canada and California to be about the same come 2025. And as we dig into what we're seeing specifically within the edible space, so again, folks on the line who might have been here a couple weeks ago when we were talking about edibles specifically saw what was on the left-hand side of the screen here. So thinking specifically about the United States market, edibles today make up about 15% of dollar sales, but they are growing. So that purple line that you see is showing that the edibles category is outpacing growth of the total market. And what we actually expect is that by 2025, the total edible space will be about 2.5 times as big as it is today. And what's exciting is that we're seeing even more substantial growth and more outpacing of the total market in the Canadian space. And so we expect by 2025, the edibles market to be about 3 times or so the size that it is today. And we're really seeing substantial growth there. And it's so interesting to me to look at the Canadian versus the US legal cannabis markets because of the difference in when these types of products were to come online. We know that Canada 2.0 is a very new industry relative to some of the established markets in the United States. So seeing the growth in the edibles market here is very exciting. And so let's talk a little bit about beverages specifically. So I first want to ground us in what's going on in the United States market. And so what we're seeing in the United States is that overall beverages make up about 5% of total edible spend in legal dispensary channels. And we don't really see all that much fluctuation from that number. In some of the most established states or those with the biggest beverage representation, it might reach up to about 6 or 7%, but it's pretty stable, about 5 to 7%. In Canada, we have seen a little bit of a different dynamic, which I think is really interesting. So within the Canadian market, just to provide a little bit of perspective, Canada, our beverage products really just came into the marketplace earlier this year. And we didn't really see that big splash or those products really getting more distribution until about midway through the year. And so what that means is if you go back to January, beverage products really only represented about 3% of total edibles products. However, as we see of where we are today, beverages actually, as of October 2020, make up 23% of the total edibles products. And so that's a much different sort of representation than we're seeing in the United States right now. And I think something that's really interesting here is we're seeing that increase in penetration is reflected by outpacing or growth of those beverages outpacing the broader edible space. And you particularly see it between that June and July timeframe. So almost month over month, June, July, August, September, into that time frame, we were seeing 20 to 30, 34 even % growth of the share or of the beverages volume versus 4, 5, 8% for total edibles. And so the share of beverages is gaining in terms of that overall edible spend. It would be amiss to talk about the overall beverages industry without talking about CBD, and specifically thinking about the hemp and marijuana market going from 2020 to 2025. We project that the total hemp and marijuana market in the United States will be about $50 billion by 2025. And to be clear, that overall number does represent the mix of what we expect to see in dispensary, general retail, and prescription. And it includes a mix of hemp CBD, marijuana, as well as THC and other cannabinoids. And I think something to keep in mind here when we're talking about this overall size, we do expect that beverages will make a large splash, particularly in those mainstream channels. So as we look into 2021, and we'll talk about what brands and products might be available in that time frame here in a little bit, but we see that about 6%, or we expect about 6% of those CBD dollars in mainstream retail to be beverages in 2021, but we expect that to increase to about 10% come 2025. And I think one number that to really keep in mind or something to focus on is that when we think about that size of that CBD beverages product, we're expecting it to be roughly about a $2 billion industry or so by 2025. But of that, we do expect about 3/4 of it to come through mainstream retail. And really that's a factor of availability. We expect as the FDA, as regulations shift, that as those products can become more available, and if they're available in your mainstream grocery stores, mass stores, mainstream retail outlets, they're likely going to outpace dispensary sales. Okay, so let's jump into a little bit of did you know tidbits. So first I want to start by thinking about why people are consuming edibles to begin with, or what is that penetration of folks that are consuming these different types of products? And based on our consumer survey work, we see in the United States that about 71% of folks are consuming edibles, and 33% actually say that it's their preferred method of cannabis product. Meanwhile, when we look at Canada, we see that about 57% consume edibles, and about 30% prefer edibles as their primary format. This to me is really interesting, again, if you think of the timeline of markets. The fact that edibles products have really only been available for a year-ish, year and a half, that we're seeing that market, those folks that prefer edibles is coming in line with a more established market like the United States legal market. So that's really exciting. So let's take a look specifically at beverages. What are those percent of folks that are actually consuming beverages and prefer beverages? In the United States, we see that about 19% consume and 8% prefer beverages. That is still a bit smaller in the Canadian market. So about 10% consuming beverages, 3% preferring them. But keep in mind that the time when this survey was conducted, it was earlier this year, before all of these new products that we're going to be talking about in the Canadian market really were available to consumers. So we would expect that this continues to increase as there's more product availability and as those products gain relevancy with consumers. When we take a look at the types of products that are available, in the US specifically, the volume is really coming from what we would consider to be drinks. This can include things like carbonated drinks, non-carbonated drinks, which includes things like non-alcoholic beer or non-alcoholic seltzers, for example, or fruit-flavored products. And what's really interesting, when we take a look at this total market, it is growing. And so the volume that we're seeing from the total beverage dollar growth in the United States is up about 21% versus what we saw last year. And I think part of that is, we'll talk about here in a few slides, is the types of products that are available to consumers. So what you're looking at on this slide is just a series of brands. The cannabis beverage space really is evolving in the United States. We have a really wide range of products available that weren't available even a year or 2 years ago. If you think a couple years back, so many of the products were high potency. They were more in shot form, which we'll talk about dosage a little bit here in a minute. But I think that's really important, because when we talk to consumers about why they're choosing edible products to begin with, including beverages, the ability to control dosage is a really big component to that. And so having products that allow consumers more ability to control those types of measures are really interesting. And so I love the spread of different types of products here. So you have everything from cannabis infused wine. I'm really excited to talk here about Cann Social Tonic in a little bit. Ripple is a really interesting one. So this is a powder that you can put into another beverage, another liquid, or put on top of products or on top of other things. And Ripple is an interesting one because it's a really high penetration in the Colorado market. So if you think about powder beverages across the board, they typically make up about 11% of beverage products. But in Colorado, they actually make up about 1/3 of total beverage sales. So Ripple's killing it. Which I think brings up another point, that when we think about the top brands, which you see on the right-hand side of the screen here. So if you think about products such as Cann, Ripple, Hi-Fi, which I know we're going to be talking about a bit later, but you see a lot of products that are doing extremely well in perhaps 1 or 2 markets. So namely something like California. But if you look at something like Keef or Dixie, it may be a situation where they might not be the #1 product in any given state, but the fact that they are in multiple states, in multiple markets, does give them that ability that when we look across the United States, to have more of that overarching presence in those multi-state situations. I think the way things are coming to fruition in Canada, quite frankly, is a little bit different than what we've seen in the United States. So I think first, what's really interesting is that nearly all of the leading products that are currently in the marketplace, so if you look at that top products in Alberta or British Columbia as of this past month, nearly all of them are coming from organizations that have some degree of partnership with some bigger beverage manufacturer or alcohol beverage manufacturer. And we're having a lot of evolution in this particular space with a lot of these partnerships. So Trust, which I look forward to talking with here in a bit, but looking at Molson Coors and Hexo partnership, looking at Canopy Growth or ABI and Tilray, a lot of really exciting brands that are really making a splash so far to date, as we saw that growth month over month as we were coming into October. One thing I do want to call out as a reminder to anyone on the line here that focuses more primarily in the US market or is not as involved in the cannabis industry, is that these packages that you see on the screen, they're beautiful packages. However, in the Canadian market, folks' hands are much more tied to what they can actually communicate and market, even than what we can say here in the United States. And so the packages that you see here aren't actually the packages that consumers would see in the marketplace, which are far more generic, not able to have that branding, that communication, that really cool color. So I look forward to talking a little bit about how brands can grow and really communicate their benefits when those hands are tied in the communication aspect. And we do continue to see that more hemp and CBD beverages are starting to get started. So obviously throughout 2021, their regulation has probably been a little bit heavier than maybe we anticipated coming into the year. However, products are beginning to be developed, and we do expect that these types of products are going to continue to hit shelves and grow going to 2021, 2022, and beyond. Again, thinking about that hemp CBD beverages making up a $2 billion industry by 2025. So I mentioned earlier that one of the reasons that folks opt into the edibles category to begin with is because of the ability to control dosage. And not only the ability to control it, but also have the ability to opt into lower dosage options easier. And we see that the consumers that prefer those edibles products are far more likely to prefer products that have less than a 10 milligram THC content. And obviously with edibles products, it's easier to control that sort of thing. We also see that when we ask consumers in the United States, just for some perspective of what their ideal dose is, about 40% are saying it's 10% or less. In Canada, that's even higher. And so as we think about the growth of edibles and the growth of beverages specifically in Canada, part of that is probably a function of that lower dose preference as well. But we are seeing growth, particularly in beverages, because of this. If we look at the California market, for example, we've seen about 16% growth versus 2019 in those products that are available that are less than 10 milligrams THC per product. This is one of my personal favorite slides. So I think the overall premise of this presentation is eat, drink, and be merry. And thinking about the holidays coming up, I think I've gotten the question a couple of times now, what could we possibly expect coming into the holidays? And what you're looking at here is a chart that's showing the sales increase from the first portion of December, so December 1st through 17th, versus the week leading up to Christmas. Always a big week for cannabis sales overall, both for personal use as well as potentially gift giving. But I find it really interesting that beverages in particular have seen a higher bump in sales in 2019 versus than even topicals, which are probably something that's turning into a more common product for gift giving. And so I think something to take away from this as we go into the next couple months, as we go into the holidays, be prepared, expect that sort of lift in beverages, because ultimately people are opting into beverages to relax and in some cases to have fun. And I think the holidays are the perfect time for that, right? I don't know anyone who couldn't use a little help de-stressing during the holidays. And I think that it's really interesting to see the shift in the way beverage brands are coming together to promote more of a social or fun type of occasion and need state. Which I think brings me to my next point, which is I don't think we can talk about the cannabis beverage industry without talking about potential interaction with alcohol. And so what you're looking at on this slide is when we survey consumers, we take a look at folks that are current cannabis consumers and folks that are current alcohol consumers. We want to understand that overlap, because our perspective is that one way or another, there is likely a long-term impact to the alcohol industry. We might not see it in the next year, maybe not even the next year and a half or so, but long-term, folks that are consumers of cannabis who also consume alcohol, that group is declining. And consumers who use alcohol, who also use cannabis, is increasing. So what that means is cannabis usage among these folks who are already involved in the alcohol beverage category do continue to increase. And when we talk to folks about why, or when this type of product, when each of these different types of products are relevant, we see that half the time folks are telling us that alcohol and cannabis are good for kind of the same times of day or the week, or sometimes it's the same time of day or week, and sometimes it's different. But one way or another, consumers are starting to think about the interaction and the role and need state in their lives of cannabis products versus alcohol products and how those things interact. To be totally honest, I could probably talk for an entire hour specifically about the interaction of alcohol and cannabis, but we do have other things to get to. And so keeping that on the clock, I want to switch gears a little bit here, and we're going to go ahead and introduce our panel in just a second. Before we do, I do just want to call out, first of all, thank you everyone on the panel for taking the time to talk with us today, but I also want to highlight the great work all these folks are doing with these amazing brands. So we have Cann Social Tonic will be here today, and we see that they've had one of the fastest growing brands in California and 3 of the top SKUs in the California market in October. So really exciting things there. We have Hi-Fi Hops, has been a top 5 beverage brand in California for the past 2 years and is one of the first perceived beers, and putting that Lagunitas name on a product. And then we have Trust, which is one of the fastest growing Canadian beverage products, had 3 of the top 5 SKUs in Alberta in October. And so really excited to spend some time talking with all of these folks. And so I'm going to do something really dramatic here and try to maybe stop sharing my screen, and we can turn on some video and see if we can see everyone's lovely faces. So let's see here.
Hey, everyone.
No, let's see. I'm trying to find. Okay, I think I got the looks good from my team. I think the only thing is I can't actually see anyone. So trying to figure out how to make that happen here, but I won't spend too much time there. But how about you guys, Luke or Jeremy, or Luke, Jeremy, and Lori? Can you guys see everyone?
We can see everyone. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Then as long as you guys can see everyone, we will just go with that. So first of all, thank you guys all for being here today. Before we jump into some questions, maybe each of you could take a chance to just introduce yourselves, and would love to hear a little bit about how you came to do what you do currently and your evolution into the cannabis space. Maybe I'll pick on someone to go first. Maybe we start with Luke, just because you're the first picture on my screen.
Sure. So I actually was never a cannabis consumer before starting a company. I'd never been to a dispensary, and found THC to be really scary after a bad pot brownie I had in college. But my co-founder and good friend, Jake Bullock, grew up in Colorado, and he watched the legalization happen over many years, and we were both very good friends and very heavy alcohol drinkers. I thought your point on the overlap between alcohol and cannabis consumers is really salient, because we both were very heavy alcohol drinkers in our 20s, and as soon as we turned 30, I think, decided to scale back. I have a consumer packaged goods consulting background, helping big CPG companies launch brands and products on short timelines with small budgets. And so his experience in the cannabis industry and my scrappy startup-y type, let's get something to market, proved to be a pretty good combination. And our differing perspectives, him being very familiar with cannabinoids and how the market was behaving from his experience analyzing Colorado and California from an investor perspective, and me as that person who you couldn't pay to walk into a dispensary. I think we put our heads together to try and create that first product that would take somebody like me and draw me in to make their first ever dispensary purchase. And so that's Cann. It's a beautifully branded, really good tasting, low sugar, low calorie, non-alcoholic social drink, and we'll never offer a product above 5 milligrams of THC, because that is a risk to a newer consumer who's a little bit scared to get started.
Yeah, no, I think that that's a great background. Thank you, Luke. And I think as we have this conversation, would love to hit on some of those points around how you identified that need state and thinking about that first point of entry, because we hear that a lot, that edibles, beverages, it's such a familiar form to consumers. And so would love to hear a little bit more about that. Jeremy, do you want to go next?
Yeah, can everybody hear me okay?
Yep, can hear you.
Perfect. So unusual to be up. Of course, there goes my phone ringing. It's hold on, I have to, never mind, it's just gonna ring. So it's unusual to be doing this inside of a little screen. I so wish we could all be in person, and I miss that. And I know I will hopefully get a chance to meet everybody, and will shaking hands be a thing? Will we still do that, or even hugs? I was kind of a hugger the last time. I remember so. the Cannabis Drinks Expo in San Francisco. I was hugging a lot of people that I had just freshly met, and now I'm a little bit worried about hugs. But now that I've talked about hugs for a while, my name is Jeremy Marshall. I'm the brewmaster at Lagunitas. I know a lot about beer. I have an intense passion for Alberta because all of our barley farmers are located in the prairie in Alberta. So I know a little bit about Canadians, and I like to ferment pretty much anything, including foods. So I'm really big into just anything edible or drinkable that's fermented, of course. And then the love of cannabis extends very, very deep within the Lagunitas culture. We are the only brewery that has been shut down by the government because we were kind of letting some people smoke on the premises back in 2005. And they sent agents there to do an undercover operation, and they shut us down for it. And of course, we were one of the early people to kind of jump into this thing, but it's more of an acknowledgement of just a reflection of how the times are changing and how attitudes are changing, and really all the stuff that you pointed out in your presentation and all the stuff that Luke alluded to as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely think that some of those stories in the history of Lagunitas make it a very apropos brand to be jumping into this space. So happy to have you here. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. And Lori, maybe if you could give us a little bit about your background.
Sure. I spent 15 years in CPG marketing and food. Food and drinks is my passion. I was 15 years at General Mills, working everything from Cheerios to Old El Paso. And then I went into a whole other world. I went to luxury apparel, a more lifestyle brand. And when I heard about the opportunity about Trust, it was an opportunity I couldn't say no to. It's not many times in our life or career where we get to really be builders and pioneers and build something from scratch. And it's such a privilege every day to build with partners, with other brands like are here today, a brand new category, but a category that we truly believe are going to change people's lives. When we talk to consumers, they call cannabis beverages a world of wonder. And these are even people who've never tried it before, because there are so many amazing options that haven't existed before. It's such a great alternative to what's existed before, whether it be other kind of beverages or whether it be things like, coffee, caffeine, or even pharmaceuticals. So I kind of feel like we're building a little new world of wonder every single day, and it's a pretty exciting place to be.
I love that analogy, and I 100% agree with you that I think that it comes along very rarely in a lifetime, especially if you think about the industries such as consumer packaged goods, of really having an industry that you get to start from scratch and really build it from the ground up. So I share your enthusiasm from that perspective. I think it's the most exciting consumer packaged goods industry we could possibly imagine.
Definitely.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys for that. And so maybe we could just jump into a couple questions. And Lori, I might actually pick on you first a little bit because I'd love to just talk a little bit more and make sure that we're educating the group here on some of those nuances and things to think about within the Canada industry in particular. So Cannabis 2.0 is fairly new. We're about a year in. And so how do you think that as you're building it from the ground up, as you say, and really have the opportunity to shape this, how do you think that the Canada beverage market might look a little bit different than what we see in the United States? And I would also love, as you're talking about that, keeping in mind, you don't have the ability to really promote brands, right? Like you're tied with those things. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that as we're thinking about the direction of the Canada cannabis market.
Sure. I'll start by saying that although edibles are 2.0 was legalized last December, like Kelly said, beverages really didn't show up for consumers until around the summer. So we're only around 6 months in as a category in Canada, and Trust, we're just 4 months in. So it's very, very new. But I think there are two ways in which, say in the next year or two, there will be very different in the US. I think the first is in innovation. What I'm really, really excited to see within beverages is seeing real beverage first companies and consumer first companies enter this space. So the way we think of ourselves is we're not a cannabis company, we're a beverage company, and we put the consumers at first of everything we can do. When we talk about our products, this is the only category that can combine cannabis with other amazing ingredients, you know, whether it be like the hops and barley, whether it be fruit flavors or other adaptogens to really create experiences for occasions and need states. So what I'm really excited about in the next few years is actually innovation. We have a big innovation plan to launch beverage brands against many different occasions, not just socializing, recreational, but in wellness space, in mental acuity as well. And I think that's going to be incredibly exciting with these kind of beverage first companies coming in, not cannabis first. So I'm hoping that in Canada, although we started behind, we'll kind of get ahead in the innovation space. And I really believe that innovation is going to drive adoption of this category. The big challenge is our regulations. So for people who don't know, we're one of the first federally legal market, which is fantastic. And but we're heavily regulated compared to Colorado and California. So really restrictive marketing, really restrictive distribution, only in legal channels, legal retail, like dispensaries. So that's the challenge. The way we look at that challenge, though, is that when you can't market, when you can't, you don't have the toolkit you're used to, you go back to the craft. And the craft is making sure you understand consumers better than anything, understanding their needs and wants, and making sure you build the best product. So what really we're focusing on is building the best tasting product that delivers the very best experience for a broad range of cannabis occasions and non-cannabis too. So I think those are two ways that we're different.
Yeah, no, I can totally appreciate that. And from my background, I worked with Nielsen for 13 years, oftentimes alcohol beverage and traditional CPG. And, the most successful innovations put that consumer first and understanding that point of relevance and differentiation and advantage versus the competition. And I love that you brought up product because I think that if you have a product that doesn't live up to those expectations and a product that consumers are disappointed and they're not going to come back. So I love that you're putting that consumer first. I think along those lines, and maybe I'll open up here to Luke and Jeremy as well. Lori, maybe love to hear from you first on what you would take away maybe looking at the US market. So is there anything that in looking at the US market you learned from that kind of set this strategy? And then Luke and Jeremy, would love your thoughts on kind of vice versa. What are your thoughts on hearing about and seeing what's going on in Canada and any applicability to the markets that you play in?
I can say we learned a lot from the US. So in the first year I was at Trust before we launched and pre-COVID, we spent tons of time in Colorado and California. My first cannabis beverage was a hi-fi hops ever, because we didn't have it here, and we couldn't do our R&D here because of the restrictive environment. So we were in California and Colorado a lot, developing our portfolio. So we can learn a lot. I love to see how you guys are educating consumers about the benefits of CIB in super, super clear and fun ways that make sense for your brands. That is something that we aspire to do. We can only do it in a limited manner, basically in 19+ settings. So really in the retail channel and other settings where you can age gate. So really love to see that. I love the innovation that's specifically on the panel today. Getting into the lower doses, far more approachable for non-users, getting into sessionability. But we spent tons of time in the US, and we continue to look at the US and are very inspired as we kind of develop what the category looks like in Canada.
Wonderful, thanks, Lori. Luke or Jeremy, what are your thoughts on looking at the Canadian market and the things that are going on there and finding inspiration?
Yeah, I think it's super exciting. In Canada, you have a bunch of people that are going to make their first dispensary trip and encountering beautifully branded products like Trust and approachably dosed products at the same time. So I think that you stand a chance to retain all of these consumers and keep them loyal from day one. Whereas in California, for the first year that cannabis beverages were on the market, 10 milligrams was low dose and 100 milligrams was all the buyer wanted to talk to you about. You walk into a cannabis dispensary and you head over to the fridge because you're like, I'm trying to drink less alcohol, maybe one of these is a good substitute, and you accidentally drink 100 milligram lemonade, you're never going back to the dispensary again. And so I think we've had a lot of undoing that we've needed to deal with, retraining people in the California channel to think not on a dollar per milligram basis. We don't think dollar per percent ABV in alcohol, and eventually we won't with cannabis beverages. And also, cannabis dispensaries built their inventory rooms assuming that cannabis beverages were low velocity products. And so you don't have any room to put the product even when it is selling really quickly. And so you'll have products stock out, and then you'll have to tell people, oh wait, the velocity was low because it was out of stock for 6.5 out of 7 days. You should probably look more carefully at SKU level data. And those are very clunky and difficult conversations to have. Canada from day one, I think, is set up to support beverage, whereas we are going to need to really kind of just shove puzzle pieces together that don't quite fit naturally until the US individual markets wake up to it.
Yeah, I would add Canada kind of scary to a bunch of Californians because it's so heavily regulated and there's so many rules. And I think it's a good indication of what might be coming, especially what us as Bev Alc are used to. Very heavily regulated, and I feel like there is a little bit of an element of like that wild, wild west that exists in the States as one state pops off one by one, whereas in Canada, it's a very rigid framework. And my insight into it continues to be those Alberta and a little bit of Satch, the farmers, and these are salt of your earth guys that tell me that, oh, I don't, you wouldn't find me in a dispensary, and I find it funny because Canadians drink a lot of beer, and I think BDSA and all of us can agree that is the tide that is changing. But my window into it is so colored by beer that I still see that old view kind of percolating through. So I always try to talk to their kids. I always try to find out what their kids, and then I got to get the farmers away. Like, okay, your dad's not listening. Okay, now you tell me what are the kids doing up here?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And, I think calling out that it's a little bit of the Wild West, or what is that regulation? it's definitely gotten off to that different start. I personally think that one of the other aspects that maybe we didn't spend as much time talking about in the actual presentation is seeing that interaction and folks walking into dispensaries for the first time, choosing beverages, to your point of, you know, if they try a 100 milligram beverage, they're never going to come back to the dispensary. And so how can you make beverages in a form that is recognizable, but also maybe fits into some of the most common use cases that they're already drinking beverages, whether that's alcohol or something else. So I think that that's a really interesting point there. And I think the other thing as we look at the US versus the Canadian market, which I love thinking about, is that Luke and Jeremy, I think that when you guys were launching and really coming into the beverage space yourselves, you're already coming into a pretty established beverage category, right? Or I'm sorry, a pretty established edibles category. Whereas Lori, I think you have a much different dynamic there, obviously, where edibles and beverages are coming online simultaneously, and consumers have the opportunity to see where all of them, each of them, really fits into their lives. Which actually maybe brings me to a next question, and maybe Jeremy would love to hear your thoughts on this. Thinking about those states. So when we're seeing states come online now, so whether if you're thinking about Illinois or Michigan, that we're seeing them get to what looks like a more mature market a little bit sooner than maybe something like Colorado when it first came into fruition. And so what are some thoughts on how you can keep that in mind as more states are coming online, and what it might mean for beverages specifically? Do you think that to what degree will the products be similar or different than maybe what we've seen in the past as some of these states maybe are starting to look more mature a little bit earlier in their timeline?
Yeah, well, of course, no discussion to answer that would be complete without mentioning it's blame the internet, right? We all have everything available to us simultaneously, but also keep in mind that a lot of the people that built out earlier things in, say, California or Colorado, a lot of those same people are the ones that are going to seek the opportunity in the new states. But it doesn't change the fact that we as beverage producers have two strikes against us. What we make is heavy, and what we make requires very intense capital build out. It is no small feat to put in a beverage line, and all the quality control metrics that you have to have in place to support a beverage line. So it does effectively shut out the really small, less well-funded kind of people, unfortunately. And it's just it just comes with the territory. I look at the trends that are just going on in BevAlc, and there's a lot of different buckets. There's the innovation bucket, and then there's the package type. And we have seen just a phenomenal shift from things in bottles to things in cans. Not just beer, but you also have wine. Wine in a can is no longer, you're not going to be judged maybe the way you would have been 10 years ago. We're seeing the explosion of the seltzer category, which seltzer is this thing that knows no bottles, right? And then you can see a lot of the slim cans being picked up and adopted by some of the new entrants. But the one thing is these things are, though you can max out a truck weight and get a lot more cans in there than you could bottles, it doesn't change the fact that what we do is heavy. And it's heavy to move it around, and it's CapEx intensive to build out. So
yeah, and I think you just called on something else that I was going to touch on with that too, is like the distribution metric, or being able to get product to retailers to be able to sell the product. Significantly different for something like beverages versus some of the other types of products that are out there.
Yes.
Requires a lot of money, requires a lot of logistics. So yeah, so Anything else to add on that, Luke or Lori?
On the regional aspect, we don't, of course, have that as much because we're federally legal. So Canada's kind of moving together. But if we look at a crystal ball, we expect that regionality will play in this category much like it does in beverage alcohol. So we're kind of starting with this portfolio, but knowing that there'll be regional nuance, and our expectation is that regions will be really, really different, have different preferences, and maybe in the long run there'll be regional, beers, much like there is in the beer industry. So we think of this category way more similar to the beverage category than kind of cannabis. So we expect regionality to play a role once the adoption curve, we've gone up the adoption curve a bit more.
Yeah.
The one thing I'll add is the one thing that is really holding this product category from exploding, holding this product category back from exploding in the US is price relative to premium alcohol alternatives. And as you have subscale manufacturing and supply chain in each state, and there aren't really true co-packers in each state operating large facilities that charge CPG level tolling fees, you're going to see people buy these items as novelties more often than they buy them as true alcohol substitutes.
Yeah, no, that's a great call out. And I know that we've had some side conversations about or comments here about how we don't necessarily shop by price per ABV in the alcohol beverage industry, but I do completely agree with you, Luke, that when you think about the relative price between something like a 6-pack or 4-pack or something of a cannabis product, the absolute price point is significantly different than alcohol. And so there's probably a bit more thoughtfulness in terms of what does that need state, what is that occasion, when it is a true substitute versus maybe supplement or completely new occasion. Yeah, so guys, I'm keeping an eye on the clock. And so I wanted to maybe jump a little bit here into talking a little bit about what you think is next to come. And Luke, maybe I'll start with you on this one. Is if we think about whether it's the beverage category or something else, thinking about the next format or form or benefit the beverage product could provide, what do you think is it? What do you think is the next big innovation that could really expand this category?
I think it's just a volume of differentiated players in the microdose sessionable space. The only two cannabis beverages that I buy, I'd probably buy Trust if I were in Canada, but are the 2 milligram hi-fi hops, the white label, and my own product. And now you go to a dispensary and you'll see like a fridge full of Cann, but if you go to a grocery store and you see a fridge full of one brand of the same category, it's just not an interesting place to shop. And so I think we all stand to gain a lot from more sophisticated operators with beautiful packaging and truly approachably dosed brands. Brands that mean to that new consumer, I'm never going to get you too high so that you feel like you're going to churn from this industry or this plant. And if you look at beverage alcohol, there are many winners in seltzer. There are many winners in hard kombucha, for God's sake. There are so many opportunities for people to create just sessionable microdose, drink 24 of these just like you would drink 24 White Claws with friends. We just need them to have a clearer path to exist so that the entire category can get legitimized. So I think it's variety. The future is all about variety and specificity of what that product is offering, just like you see in alcohol.
Jeremy, what do you think? What do you think is the next big thing?
Well, I would agree with Luke there about lower dosages. That is definitely something. I think it takes the fear and the mystique out of someone who wouldn't normally had considered it before. So I would agree with that. If I look to broader beverages, both alcoholic and non-alcoholic, at Lagunitas, we already believe in people being more health conscious, and we're already working on a non-alcoholic IPA that we've just released. And I think the pandemic has only heightened that. It's only increased those feelings. So, but when you look at the space, you see a lot of things it used to be hard becoming soft, and a lot of things that were soft becoming hard. So a lot of meshing, and I think that will continue. But I have to draw some analogies, having been 17 years in the craft brewing industry, and it started as these artistic people that have a dream, and then it kind of grew up, and then it became a real thing, and then the big guys bought up the smaller guys. And you can look to cannabis, and I guess my point is, like, the team always takes on the personality of the coach kind of thing. So that's within the industry as a whole and within individual brands. And I totally agree. We need a variety. You don't ever want to just open up a cooler and see just domination, right? With no choice. But the one key difference that I notice that I find somewhat refreshing is that the cannabis industry tends to be a little bit more female than the Bev Alc, and I think you can see that expressed in the nature of the products, both the design, the approachability, the warmth, and it's one thing that I know Bev Alc has really come to reckon with, that is it's kind of been a little bit of a boys club for many years, and Craft does a better job. Craft is the arms open, ready to give hugs, just like me. And but within cannabis, you tend to find a little bit more of this feminine aspect that I find really refreshing.
Yeah, I'd love to spend some time another day talking about targeting and consumers and understanding how to identify the different user groups you're going after for different types of products. But I want to give Lori a chance to share with us her thoughts as well on what's next. I know we spent a lot of time talking about the Canadian market, but any closing thoughts here?
I agree with both of the guys. We're so early days that what's next is variety and lots of offerings. I think one of the things I'm most excited about for the future in the next few years is the power of this plant, though. I think with beverages now, we're kind of playing with the THC CBD, but all the rare cannabinoids, some of the science on some of the rare cannabinoids and the benefits of the world of terpenes, like the essential oils or the hops. So I'm super excited about exploring the power of this plant in many ways beyond what it is today.
Yeah, no, I am 100% with you there. And I know we didn't get a chance to bring it up during this discussion, but, thinking about even just CBD, and I think between the US and Canadian markets, they're regulated so differently, right? The US is a little bit of a mess right now. We're working on figuring it out. But in Canada, hemp really regulated the same degree as marijuana and sold through cannabis retailers. And so much different landscape up there. And so I 100% hear you on looking at kind of the broader range of the cannabinoid products out there. So yeah, so that brings us to the top of the hour, guys. But thank you all so much for taking the time to chat with us today. I really look forward to connecting and working with you all more in the future. But thank you all, and looking forward to this exciting category.
Thank you so much. This has been great.
Yeah. Thank you. Take care. Yeah, we will talk to you soon. And thank you all who are able to attend. If any questions come up at this point, feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.